Hello and welcome to Walking the Earth podcast. Everyone, want to thank you real quick for everyone who has given us a rating and review out on iTunes. Really appreciate all the 5-star reviews that have been coming out. And if you haven't had a chance yet and you are appreciating this show, please do help us out if you can and give us a quick rating review on iTunes. It really does go a long way to help us out. Also, if you haven't taken advantage of it yet, we still have the offer for listeners for a free audiobook from Audible. That's available at audibletrial.com/WTE podcast. Zachary, I think you mentioned you are a fan of audiobooks as well, yeah?
I am, yeah. I mean, there's nothing better on a long flight, right?
Right,
Just
yeah.
Settle in with a good book.
Yeah, and you being an author, you had a Stephen King book that.
He wrote a memoir about writing called On Writing, and it's the best. People ask me what's the best book for a young writer to read. I think it really is On Writing. It's absolutely fantastic, and you don't have to be a fan of his fiction either, which I'm not a particularly big fan of his fiction, but it's a tremendous book about writing.
Nice, and a lot of I think the digital nomads out there. Are writers, or aspiring writers as well.
For sure.
And by the way, this Zachary I just mentioned I'm talking to, Zachary Stockill is the full name. He hails from Canada, but has been walking the earth for many, many years now.
I suppose so.
And I'm Mike Margulies, by the way, if you haven't tuned into the pod, if it's your first time tuning in, and we're sitting here in Chiang Mai, of course, Chiang Mai, Thailand, that is. But yeah, Zachary, you've been on the road forever. You are yourself an author, so you're a self-published author. You've also contributed to Huffington Post and Mike and other online places, kind of doing the digital nomad thing. You kind of mentioned that you listened to one of the previous episodes, with Sabrina, the accidental entrepreneur, which actually was recorded in this exact room.
Oh, wow.
And you had related to that, and that you stumbled into you accidentally became a digital nomad of sorts yourself with your first book, yeah?
Yeah, I did. I've been traveling and taking long trips since about 2008 when I was attending university.
Yeah.
But when I graduated from my master's degree last year, I'd been working on this book about relationships and jealousy and just trying to help people let go of jealousy and possessiveness in their romantic relationships. And to my great surprise, it started selling quite well. And since then I've been sort of taking advantage of this ability to travel and work and do something I believe in, and it's been really great so far. It has challenges. It's a trade-off like anything else in life.
Yeah.
But being a digital nomad is really a hell of a lot of fun, as you know.
Yeah, no, I think it's about, well, to me, it's about that freedom, right, of being able to kind of, you have control of your own life, and you can, be the places you want to be, see interesting things, and really steer your own ship. And actually, I would say not only is it awesome what you're doing as an author, but just before we started recording, you were talking the story of how you started your travels. You mentioned you were studying abroad. So I don't know if do you call that a digital nomad as well? I guess you can still.
I think in a certain sense, yeah. I mean, I was very fortunate when I was doing my undergraduate degree and when I was doing my master's degrees. The Canadian government is pretty good about funding research scholars. So in a certain sense, I got a taste of this lifestyle when I was still in university,
right,
when I was essentially being paid to travel and do work that I believe in and conduct field research in North India and things like that. So, yeah, I mean, there is something truly intoxicating with this lifestyle once you get that sort of that taste of freedom and just the infinite possibilities in your bones. It's tough to give up.
Yeah, and that's something. I never did study abroad myself. It's something that. I won't say I wish I did that, because I always say everything in my life led me to where I am today. So I'm not gonna say I wish I did something different, but I never did do a study abroad, and I think it's awesome. I think it's a great thing, and we haven't talked about it so much on the show, and it's something really cool. People who have opportunities to do it, now that I've spent a lot of time traveling, I would recommend that anyone else a chance. Like, hey, get out there and study. You were in India doing your.
I was, yeah. My first study abroad, I was in 2008. I was doing my undergraduate degree at the University of Ottawa, Canada. And this Ontario government program came up sending certain scholars in Ontario to go to study at Indian University for either a semester or two. And it was great. I mean, I was in the University of Pune in South India, close to Bombay. And it was great. I mean, it was also very challenging at times.
Yeah.
Indian universities tend to run on what's called Indian time, which is
right.
Sort of, you can start later and you go to class and there's some random Hindu holiday and nobody's there and you're sitting in a class by yourself for half an hour.
And by the way, it is Diwali right now.
It is
so
Diwali.
Happy Diwali,
happy Diwali
to all our
you.
listeners in India.
Absolutely.
I think we do have some listeners out there from.
Happy Diwali.
Yeah, happy Diwali.
I miss India all the time.
Yeah, me too, man. Yeah, and I spent 4 months out there myself, not as long as you had spent out there. So I feel like in 4 months in India, it was just like a small taste of what that country has to offer.
You know, it's funny because I don't know about you, but every time I talk to people about spending time in India, which I've been fortunate, I've been there several times, and I know the country fairly well, at least the northern part. When I talk to people who've been to India, they seem to either really love it or really hate
Right.
it. It doesn't seem like there's anyone in between. Like nobody's ever said to me,
India's okay.
India's okay. It's like they either say, you know, if someone put a gun to my head and offered me $50,000, there's no way in hell I'd go back. Or they're like me, they're always kind of thinking about the next time they're going to go to India. It's not even a question, right? So it's interesting. It's a very sort of polarizing place, I think.
I always describe India as just this chaos is the word I like to use, because it's so chaotic, and when chaos means is like you can get lost in it.
Yes.
Right? It's very possible to get lost in it, and but at the same time, the good thing about chaos is if you can navigate it, you can find this amazing, beautiful experience that you couldn't possibly have found anywhere else.
Absolutely.
And so it's like India's like a test of like, can you navigate through the chaos? And
it is, but I think sometimes you have to sort of just let yourself get lost in the chaos.
Yeah.
Right? I mean, like your travel plans will get messed up. Your train will be delayed by a day.
Yeah.
You'll end up, you know, taking a bus to Nepal, riding on a roof with, you know, a group of Sherpas, whatever. You know, it's like, so, and that's part of the fun of India. Like, it's chaos, but it's delicious chaos.
I love that. Delicious chaos. That's awesome.
Literally delicious chaos. I mean, is there any better country in the world to eat?
That is true.
I mean, just, if you're a vegetarian, if you're a raging carnivore, it doesn't matter. It's just, and the diversity north to south. Like,
I just had some good Indian food here in Chiang the other day, and I was I always get so happy when I get Indian food. Like, I eat with my hand too. Like, you know, if I get a thali out here, I'm gonna eat it like I'm in India. I'm gonna eat with my hand. It also you are gonna have those crazy experiences, but it's like, can you roll with it?
Exactly.
You know? It really forces you to, hey, just roll with the punches and go with it.
And certain substances help with that. I mean, I remember there's this Indian rum called Old Monk.
Oh yeah, oh my God.
Yeah, it kind of looks like and smells a bit like turpentine. But it helps one roll with it as well.
I had oh my God, that had acid reflux hangovers from that stuff.
Yeah.
Like, God,
Old Monk stays with you.
That stuff will kill you, man.
It will.
Man, I really liked what you were saying though. You know, before the show, what you actually were doing your research on it there, I find like super fascinating, because you were saying how back in, I guess it was like the 60s and whatnot, we had this influx of kind of Western people into India, the Beatles and all these kind of folks, and coming in and learning from India, and you were doing research on kind of the opposite of that. You know, what was the impression? And correct me if I'm misstating any of this, right? But the impression that India had of all this coming in.
Yeah, I mean, I've always been really interested in the history of tourism. I studied history for years, and I think at the core I'll always kind of be a historian in one sense or another. And one thing I was really interested in is in the 60s you have all these hordes of Western tourists. I mean, certainly not hordes in the sense that we have today. I mean, it's never been quicker, easier, cheaper to get to India.
Right.
It's not comparable in that sense. But in the 1960s, you really have the first influx of Western tourists into India in a big way, at least since the fall of the Raj, and when the British left India in the 1940s. And this was a very different type of tourist. I mean, you had those kind of spiritual seekers for centuries. I mean, certainly since the beginning of British colonialism in one form or another. You had Westerners going to India looking for enlightenment, you know, doing yoga, that kind of thing. But in the 1960s, this really picks up, not partially due to people like the Beatles really embracing Indian culture, expressing an interest in Indian culture, and going to India to sort of learn more. So yeah, a lot of my graduate research was focused on finding out what did Indians think about that?
Right.
How did that impact their culture? How did were some of them offended or troubled by the fact that it was almost like certain elements in Western culture were almost appropriating Indian culture.
Right.
And, you know, I mean, we had things like sitars and pop music, and all this kind of thing. I was curious about what Indians thought of that.
So I guess what sort of conclusions did you end up coming to from all that?
Well, like any good academic, I came to some very convoluted and non-simplistic conclusions because we're not allowed to have a straight answer in academia.
Right.
And I mean, I think that I mean, there were a lot of different responses, and I could talk about that all day. But I mean, some of them were things like Ravi Shankar, probably the most famous Indian classical musician of all time, certainly the best known Indian musician abroad. A lot of people in India started questioning his adherence to quote unquote traditionalism in Indian music, and were saying that perhaps he was deviating from these centuries of the tradition of Hindustani classical music, which was very serious and devout, and here he is, teaching, giving lessons to this long-haired beetle, and doing all these things and playing.
So they
at
were
these...
taken aback.
Well, I think so. I think some people were sort of troubled by that, and I think certain, the old guard, if you will, in Indian society and people involved in Hindustani classical music, a lot of them were sort of troubled by and often confused, I think, by, well, what are these Westerners looking for by sort of appropriating our culture and even just expressing an interest in our culture? Because I think many of them saw it as just so incredibly different from Western pop music. You couldn't mix those things in any way. I think a lot of people thought.
And there is a big difference. I mean, a massive cultural difference between Western countries and India, but that's the reason. That's like actually the exact. Maybe it's just the fact that there is such a stark contrast that
there is, yeah,
it forces you to re-examine your.
I mean,
assumptions.
I'm sure you'd agree. I generally agree that we have more in common with our neighbors than we have in different things.
I would absolutely agree with that. Yes.
But even small things. I mean, like Ravi Shankar gained some, and he eventually stopped playing pop music concerts because he was at Woodstock and in the Isle of Wight and all these festivals. I'm not sure if he was at the Isle of Wight. Don't quote me on that. But anyway, he would ask his audiences, because it was quite in vogue at the time, much like today, for people to light up a joint during concerts.
Right.
And he would tell people, please don't smoke during my concert. Like, this is not, you're not seeing Hendrix here. This is a very different thing,
Oh, wow. So that kind of was imported in. Because I remember in India it was actually pretty commonplace. Like people, the charas, basically hash. Very commonplace to find charas, and people would drill up joints, or they had the chillums, the pipes. And that was kind of common. Was that an element that was kind of imported by these hippies coming in, or I had the impression that was kind of part of the culture as well.
It was, yeah. I mean, I certainly don't think the hippies brought marijuana to India. I mean, if you walk around, it grows everywhere.
Yeah, and, especially in the north. It's just
and there's certain religious festivals that, have you ever had a bung lassi, the yogurt?
Yeah, the bung lassi.
And there's certain, I wouldn't.
Which is it's like a milkshake with weed in it, basically.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, good times.
Yeah.
And it's unfortunate in a way because I think a lot of people would argue that Indian classical music goes really well with a chara.
Yeah.
But a lot of people.
So that was all kind of imported from the hippies, huh?
Well, I think that a lot of the hippies heard Indian classical music, these ragas, these pieces of music that would go on for half an hour, sometimes several hours, this long piece of music on one chord. And I think a lot of people associate it with, consciousness expansion. Because it is, you do get in sort of the zone if you're at hearing a beautiful sitarist play.
Right.
And I think, a lot of people would say, oh, some drugs would make this even better.
Right.
But a lot of people in India, and I understand why, objected to that sort of behavior at Indian classical concerts.
Yeah, I could see that. If before this influence came, it was more, I don't know, from some perspective, could have been like a more pure thing, you could say, and then you could say it became tainted. And I guess it all comes back to what's point of views and all this and stuff. That's really interesting.
It was a lot of fun, yeah.
Yeah, India really is like a magical country, though, and it is. I don't know. There is something special about it, like in that sense of like the spiritual kind of way, and it's not just that the fact that there's charas and banglasis and stuff. But there's something there, and like something in the air, something in the culture and like the atmosphere. And
I think you can achieve enlightenment and spiritual growth whether you're sitting at home in nowhere Kentucky in your bathtub, as just as easily, I think, as if you're in the Himalayas. I think a lot of people go to India with the expectation that they're going to, quote unquote, find themselves, or they're going to have this amazing spiritual experience.
Right.
And the way I see that whole thing, whether we're talking about spiritual growth or consciousness expansion and all the rest, it usually comes to you, at least in my experience, when you're not looking for it.
Yes.
And I think if you go there with that expectation, you're setting yourself up for failure. I mean, I don't know about you, but every time I've been traveling, I've always had the best times when I've placed zero expectations on my trip. I'm not going to have a great time. I'm just going to go with the flow and see what happens.
Yes.
And sometimes that'll lead to spiritual growth and higher states of consciousness, whatever you want to call it. Sometimes it won't. But I think where a lot of Western tourists get the wrong idea about India is, it seems to me they think that just by being there, it makes them a more, whatever you want to call it, enlightened person or spiritually aware or whatever, and it's all bogus.
No, it's not like something magical, like you just go there.
You can't
maybe it's like the other way around. It's like the people who are kind of the seekers end up going to India.
Yeah.
You already have that in you. Well, there's that classic tale, right, of the person seeking enlightenment, and he travels the world and all this stuff, and then when he gets enlightenment, he just starts laughing because he realized, like, the person he was looking for was right there the whole time.
Yeah.
And I think that's kind of what most people, when they're on these spiritual journeys, whether they're going there, some people go there trying to use psychedelics, some people go there via meditation or some combination of them, travel, all these different tools. And then what most people, from what I've heard, and I'm like I'm some kind of enlightened man or anything like that, but most people on the spiritual...
Unlike me, I'm totally enlightened.
Right.
I forgot you probably should have mentioned that
Yeah,
at the beginning of the show. Yeah, we've got a Buddha here, right? So,
That's right.
Yeah.
I'm sitting here with the Buddha.
Right. I'm kidding.
Yeah. And yeah, but the folks that reach those states, or even people on the path, and it tends to end up, and like you said, though, yeah, you are correct. It ends up. I agree, at least, that with you, that it comes to something internal. I would argue that it's probably, you can. There are tools people use to try to get out of themselves, maybe a little bit, and maybe that help. It's all kind of coming back to self-examination at the end of the day.
Yeah.
It's like it doesn't matter where you are in the world, what's going on. It's internally, where are you at, kind of.
Yeah, and it's I appreciate your comment about laughing too. I mean, I'm someone who, this might be too much information, but I mean, several years ago I was really interested in natural highs, whether through meditation or tantric sex or whatever. And it's interesting that throughout the world in all kinds of different cultures, whether it's in Sufism and Islam, or certain Christian mystics have talked about this experience, whether in Hinduism, Buddhism, whatever, people always often describe these moments of, attaining new levels of spiritual growth or enlightenment, if we want to call it that, and just laughing their asses off.
Yeah,
and I've had those kind of moments too,
yeah.
and it's interesting because laughter is such a sort of spontaneous reaction, and there is something about attaining varying levels of consciousness expansion that just kind of makes you want to laugh your ass off. It's like, oh my God, like I've been missing out this whole time, and it was right in front of me. I have all the tools I need already right in front of me.
Exactly. I think that's the, you hear that tale. That's the classic one.
Yeah.
Yeah. You end up laughing at yourself. Basically.
Yeah, absolutely.
What was I seeking? I'm right here.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, for sure.
And it's funny because we can sit here and we talk like, okay, yeah, I know that's the answer they come to. Why am I still confused?
yeah, exactly.
But I guess it's probably in some ways relates to your new book, actually. So your new book.
That was a magnificent segue, by the way.
Yeah, right?
Yeah, that was good.
It's like I do this on the regular. Your new book is Everyday Joy, or How to Be Happier and Healthier and Party All the Time.
Yeah.
And I feel like these experiences you've had kind of tie into this, the themes of this book.
Certainly.
And I guess one thing I would say, when I first read this, I was like, party all the time. I browsed a little bit of your book, and what I've come to understand, and you can probably speak more to this, when you say party all the time, what you really, I think, are saying is, you're not saying, oh yeah, I'm going to be wasted all the time and on drugs, but it's about making every moment of your life a celebration.
Exactly.
I really dig that.
Exactly. Actually. Yeah, I mean, you just hit the nail right on the head, to quote an oft-repeated cliche. But absolutely, and when I named the book, Everyday Joy, How to Be Happier and Healthier and Party All the Time, I was kind of hoping to maybe upset or confuse people with that, just to kind of get them interested and to reconsider partying, okay?
Right.
Because, I mean, we often associate the idea of partying as being, once a year at the office Christmas party,
right,
or perhaps every weekend getting, plastered with our friends at the bar or whatever, and it's like, that's our experience of partying. Or perhaps, we associate partying only with our college years, going out and getting wasted every night and, waking up with hangovers, and like, that's my partying years. But the reason I really like the word party is it generally, when we say the word party, it generally implies, taking ourselves, we just said, like taking ourselves less seriously and just giving ourselves permission to let down and enjoy the moment at hand and enjoy the fact that, in my view, life is a celebration. I mean, sitting here in this sweaty, uncomfortable, cramped room with you, talking, this is partying to me. This is embracing life because we're here, we're present, we're together. Yes. What more do we need than this? And what more excuse do we need to party than this? You know what I mean? Like, so that's kind of what I was trying to get at in the book. I wrote it during a very fun-filled and very intense and joyous period of my life when I was in Colombia earlier this year. But yeah, I mean, that's really the main point I'm trying to get at in the book, that life is a celebration, and we have the opportunity to indulge in that celebration at any time, whenever we want.
Yeah. You know what you just said? Actually, I'm going to latch onto that right now.
Go ahead.
You said it came out of an intense period in your life. Tell me if this is, I'm reading correctly into this, but you went through some period of darkness, I'm assuming, to reach this kind of conclusion. Isn't that funny? I find this a lot of times, like, you have to descend into some kind of dark period, but so you can come out, like, even better. I certainly experienced it for myself. I kind of like the metaphor of, say you're on top of a mountain. Well, how are you going to get to top of a higher mountain. You got to climb down first to
Sure.
climb up to the next one, and that's how I feel. Like when I'm on a high and life's good and everything's great, and then you come, everything's impermanent. You're not going to stay there forever. You'll come back down, but you end up coming up like stronger for having gone through another hardship. And I find through the hardships is for me somewhere I can grow the most.
Exactly. Actually. And I mean, I think I'm pretty real in the book. Like, I'm not trying to suggest that my life is perfect and I'm always happy. And I mean, I can be an absolute bastard sometimes. You know what I mean? And I think I try.
We all have it, man.
Yeah,
right?
Absolutely. I mean, like, I'm not trying to come off as, I hate the word guru and self-help guru and all this stuff. I mean, I'm not trying to come off as that at all. But you're right. I mean,
you're
like,
coming off as vulnerable and human.
Yeah. I mean, perhaps. But yeah, I went through some very dark periods. I mean, I think for several years I was a pretty self-centered and unhappy person.
Okay.
Certainly not all my youth, but I look at high school and stuff. I mean, I think a lot of us have that kind of experience in high school, of just being depressed and trying to find yourself, and the expectations of others are weighing on you, whether it's your parents or school or whatever. So you're absolutely right. I think sometimes you have to go through some dark periods to get to the light, for sure.
Absolutely. I still go through it. It's not like just. I'm so happy to have taken the steps I took to go on this kind of the travel lifestyle that I'm doing now. I quit my job and I'm doing all this stuff. But I'm not going to sit here and pretend that like, oh yeah, everybody listening, if you just quit your job and travel, your whole life is perfect. No, my life's not perfect.
Absolutely.
Nothing's perfect. I still go through hardships. I go through very difficult times still. Ultimately, I find, like we were tying before, it kind of comes back to my own mental state, my own head. Is what I really end up finding. But I go through that stuff still. I go through those emotions. I go through those cycles. That doesn't stop.
Absolutely.
And
it's a trade-off like everything else, right? This lifestyle. I mean, don't get me wrong, it is fantastic.
Yes.
I mean, like...
I couldn't go back, basically, I feel like.
I think I
Maybe
could.
someday in the future. Who knows?
Yeah,
Who's to say?
I think I could, and I'll tell you why. I mean, I've been thinking about this a lot lately, and my highest aspiration for years was to attain higher degrees of freedom, higher degrees of personal freedom.
Right.
So... I mean, I'm by no means drowning in cash, but in a certain sense, I've sort of got there. You know what I mean? I can live quite comfortably.
Yes.
I can travel where I want. I can sleep until noon if I want. Every day. That you have that kind of level of freedom. But the older I get, the more I'm realizing that I think that the ultimate, the way I'm going to be happiest in life and more just at peace with myself as a man, is if I'm constantly looking for, how can I make the biggest possible impact on the world? Does my life have meaning? Whereas I think, the quest for meaning has certainly taken precedence for me over the quest for freedom. And I think a lot of people come into this sort of digital nomad lifestyle seeking higher and higher and higher degrees of freedom.
Right.
But for me, at least, I mean, that's not it. It's like, what impact am I having on the world? How can I make the best possible use of my time on this rock before it's over?
Yeah.
And for me, right now, maybe it's this lifestyle for some time, but I'm not sure. I mean, I'm exploring different options, and maybe I will go home at some point.
Yeah.
I'm not sure, because I think that's really what it's about. And I think that's how I'll be happiest ultimately.
Yeah, I can relate to those things. For me too. The initial motivation was the idea of freedom, right?
Yeah.
I don't want to be tied down to this job or this location or whatever. I want to be free, and getting that for the first time is amazing. I remember I actually started my trip in India, so I still can remember and I talked about this way back in episode 1 of the podcast, and
that takes me back.
Yeah, that takes me back. I was at this moment in outside of Mumbai in Khas Valley. This beautiful field was blooming with beautiful flowers right after the monsoon, and it was a few days into this trip, and I was finally for the first time in my life, I didn't have any plan, didn't have where I had to be, didn't have any obligations. I was just completely free, and I'm sitting there this is where I'm supposed to be right now. Oh, this tremendous, overwhelming freedom. And for months, as I was backpacking, it was just that alone was just so much. It was amazing to have that. But the transition ultimately happened for me when, that eventually I needed something different. For me, it was the fact that I wanted more stable relationships. And so I came back, and there was this conflict in me, because I came back here to Chiang Mai to kind of stay put, but there was still that part of me. I was so used to having freedom that I became afraid to commit to things.
Yeah.
So I didn't want to commit to something, some class, for example, maybe, that's going this day of the week, because what if I want to go to Pi next week or something?
Right.
What if something comes up and I want to do something else? I want to keep myself open, and I got myself in this really kind of weird place where I wanted to have stability, but I also still wanted to have the freedom to move when I want, and it was kind of conflicting with itself. Mm-hmm. And so kind of finally I came to terms with it. It's you know what? no, I'm really going to really commit to the stability thing. So yeah, I'm going to actually enroll for a month of this classes or whatnot. And that was actually kind of only even really recently too. I finally was like, all right, going to do jujitsu. I'm going to start seeing, have someone help me learn some Thai and all these things, and really committing to that versus keeping the freedom as the number one thing.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, and I've been thinking a lot about what you just mentioned in terms of building and maintaining stable, intimate relationships, not just in terms of the opposite sex and dating and all the rest. I mean like really close friendships and stuff.
Yes.
And I think that's something that there's a bit of a trade-off on the road, because I don't think many of us in this lifestyle really have that. Now, we may have connections all over the world. I'm sure you do.
Yeah.
I do. I mean, people on Facebook, and you Skype with your buddy from
Yep.
Colombia or whatever, you know what I mean? Like, you have those sorts of relationships, but there really is something that I don't think communications technology will ever replace, which is actually sharing a room with someone, being in the same physical space as your friends, as the people you love and care about. So I think that, that is a big trade-off in this lifestyle, because you don't often have those kind of really close relationships you can indulge at a moment's whim, as opposed to when you're living in your hometown and you know everybody and like, let's go get a drink kind of thing, And, you run into your friends quite often. I mean, the digital nomad circles are so incestuous, right? It seems like everyone knows everybody, and so it's...
And Chiang Mai also is like a really huge, like...
It is,
It's a microcosm of all that, basically.
Yeah,
it's
you
like
can't
everyone
walk
knows everyone
4
here.
feet without saying a white guy with a laptop. So certainly, yeah. But I mean, and it's great too, because I mean, right now I've reconnected with a couple of really close friends of mine from Colombia. We were there earlier in this year, and you do have close relationships. But I'll tell you just briefly. I was at a wedding this summer in my hometown, and I connected with a bunch of my buddies from high school. And in high school, we were really, really tight, a really close group of friends. I shared my darkest secrets with them. They did with me and all the rest. And it was great to connect with them. I had a blast. I had a great time. But, I mean, those people, I could still feel separate, because those people have been sharing the same physical space now for years.
Right.
They have a whole backlog of experiences that I missed out on,
Right.
So, and I wouldn't trade my lifestyle right now, but it is a trade-off sometimes.
Yeah. It's funny, because for me, it's actually very different for me, in the sense that, like, many of my high school friends are actually in different places. So I've got some friends in San Francisco, some friends in New York, and kind of scattered abouts. And so, and granted, so my mom and dad are still in Owings Mills, Maryland, and I've got a fair amount of my friends, most of the people who went to my high school, to be fair, are still in like the Baltimore area. But a lot of my really close friends are not there, though. They're kind of scattered abouts, and so it's interesting for me in that I don't necessarily know that there's like one central hub that's like, all the people in my life that I guess in a sense, no matter where I am in the world, I'm always going to have to maintain many of my very close relationships over Skype.
Sure, yeah.
And so it kind of fell in, well, I guess ultimately for now at least I landed on, well, let's make a home then, a place where I love, and so it happens to be here.
Right.
That's an interesting thing that I'm kind of exploring now. We should, and who knows how I'm going to feel. I'm still kind of, it's a developing thing for me personally. Yeah. And so that in the moment that I'm going to go visit the friends and family and then come back here and kind of make a life for myself out here. But I'm constantly changing my ideas and thinking. So who knows how it's going to go. Yeah, man. But folks can actually, I'm going to ask one more question. Okay. I almost forgot this. We ask our guests, you might know what this is. What is one thing that you would like to do in your life before it's all said and done?
Just one thing?
Name anything. It can be. You can name more if you want.
Wow. I want to eat an entire wheel of cheese. Just all to myself, to see if I can do it.
All right.
Yeah, I'd say that's number one.
Wow, Baxter. You ate that entire wheel of cheese.
No, I mean, I don't know. I mean, I think that...
I can't help but think of the Anchorman scene.
Yeah. I mean, I think probably I want to make something, build something, create something that outlasts my life.
Okay.
For, like, centuries. I want to build one thing, create one thing that stands the test of time, so to speak. Whether it's a book or a business or a charity, something. I want to build something that outlasts my sort of physical life.
And that kind of, I think it seems to tie in with some things you were saying before about wanting to have that meaning of life. That's the most important thing for you. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely.
Having a kind of a purpose and meaning.
And I'm 27, and I think I've got a lot. Well, I know I've got so much more learning and growth to do, and I don't know what that thing is going to look like yet. But I want to build something that really impacts a lot of people, and that outlasts my life, which I realize is super vague.
No, it's okay.
But
you don't have to have a specific thing.
Yeah, that's the first thing that comes to mind.
No, that's a totally fair answer, man.
Yeah.
No, it's awesome. I think that's what a lot of us really want. We want to make our impact on the world. Actually, some other people on this podcast have expressed similar things. Like the fear of death is about not necessarily about the pain of dying, but it's about leaving this world without leaving your mark.
Right. Right.
And so I think that's definitely something I can relate to this as well. I'd like to think I can have a positive impact in the world.
For sure.
Right? But I think you're doing it, man. You're putting good messages out there, good vibes. You've got...
I'm doing my best.
Yeah, man, that's all we can do. Your book, your newest book, is kind of speaking to this exact thing. So, and again, the name of that book is Everyday Joy, or How to Be Happier and Healthier and Party All the Time. And I'll link up to that on the blog post for this episode, which is at WTEpodcast.com. Other ways folks can find what you're working on. Your website, zfstockill.com. That's Z, as you say. And
it's the right way to say it. It's the Canadian way to say it. You Americans can say Z, that's fine. zfstockill.com. Your Twitter handle is the same at zfstockill. And you're also at facebook.com/zfstockill. Your other site, actually, we mentioned this book earlier, but we didn't. It's called Retroactive Jealousy. And so we didn't. That website is retroactivejealousy.com. And as you mentioned, that is another. That book deals with kind of, I guess, if you have a relationship and you're worried about your partner, who they've been with in the past. Yeah, it's about letting go. It's about being present and letting go of jealousy and possessiveness in your intimate relationships.
So it's really kind of tied in the same things. This applies more than just relationships, but letting go of possessiveness and
absolutely.
These are good themes.
Let go of your ego. That's really what it's all about. Right?
Yeah, absolutely, man.
Life just gets so much better when you really start committing to doing
and it's hard. It's a journey.
It's very hard.
Yeah.
Absolutely. It's
how many people are enlightened, right?
Yeah, exactly. Not a whole lot.
But we all do our best, I think, and we can make mistakes, and we keep on keeping on.
Absolutely.
But yeah, those are all the ways that folks you can find Zachary. And as I said, I will post up in the blog post for this episode, WTEpodcast.com. You can find those links to Zachary's books and all the ways that you can find him online. And with that, I want to thank you, everybody, for tuning into this episode. Please do give us a rating review on iTunes if you like what you're hearing, or get yourself a free audiobook at audibletrial.com/WTE podcast. Thanks again, everybody, for listening to this episode. Thanks again, Zachary, for coming on the show.
Thank you very much for having me. Appreciate it.
Yeah, it was a good time, man.
For sure.
I'm learning a lot always.
Cool, man. That's what it's all about.
So thank you, sir. And thank you again, everybody. And we will catch you next time.